Hey guys, so I've been developing my new song called Riches to Rags on Logic Pro last night, and I have been color coding these instruments and vocals here by using Option and C together. I have written and produced the song by myself on Logic Pro 8 on Logic Pro, so hopefully I will get some further contributions from other students that want to make some that will want to lend their parts over to the a specific version that they want to do. So for now, I'm just going to have to look at the instruments and vocals they have on here. As you can see, we have the piano section, but I'm going to do it individually because I don't want to do it all together. Now for the Steinway piano 2, it has the parametric filter and the low shelf filter. So the parametric filter can adjust the sound in terms of gain, sensor, frequency, and bandwidth, whereas the low shelf filter can boost the low ends of the frequencies and reduced cutoff. The gain, on the other hand, is at plus 2.7 dB because I want to add frequencies on both of them. So that's that. And the thing with the compressor is that it will reduce the dynamics of the sound of the piano, which is why I've been modifying the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack, and release thing into them. So, yeah, that's that. Unfortunately, I don't have the option to put the tape delay to adjust the delay level in the Steinway piano 2 because I quite like it with a lot of with a bit of delay in there. So in future, I'm probably gonna have to change up the tape delay level in this one because I don't want to have a lot of delay in those pianos individually. So that's that. The second Steinway piano 2 is actually the same thing with the first piano, but I'm only going to do the track stack on it that comprises of channel EQ and compressor. I only included the high pass filter on it because it will boost the high frequencies and decrease the low frequencies in the EQ. But it would have been better if I have added in some parametric filters, low shelf filters, and low pass filters in them. And that way it will affect the sounds of the pianos altogether without me having to go overboard and do some stuff with the pianos and such. Next up is the compressor built-in. Now, what I've done here is modified the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack, and release levels of it, mainly because I want to decrease the dynamics of this sound in order to give it a boost on the main volume of the music production. But what I should have done is add in some other plugins that contain reverberation, distortion, filter effects, and the exciter effects so that the pianos can give it a new sound to the music production, but then again I need to keep it as simple as it is and save those for next time. Next up is the acoustic guitar. Next up is guitars, which contain one track stack with acoustic guitar and a warm electric guitar. The reason why is that I want to blend a classical guitar with a electric guitar. So it's not going to be one classical guitar alone. I just wanted to have a bit of electric and classical instruments in there and not just a lot of it. As you can see, the EQ has a low shelf filter, some parametric filters, and a low shelf filter, whereas the high shelf filter can only boost the high ends of the frequencies and reduce the cutoff level. The low shelf filter actually does the opposite of that, whereas the parametric filter can only modify the sound in terms of gain, center frequency, and bandwidth. The gain level, on the other hand, is at minus 4.3 dB, which has to remove the frequencies of the EQ altogether. Next up, we come to the compressor side of things. Now, as with the other instruments, I have been modifying the threshold, ratio, makeup, the attack and release levels, mainly because I want to reduce the dynamics of the acoustic guitar from there. And as you can see, I have been adjusting the input gain and output gain respectively, going at 3.5 plus 3.5 dB and plus 5.5 dB respectively. So it works better without using the auto gain in it, because if I try using the auto gain in the acoustic guitar, it will not work. So it's better off having to slightly increase the input gain and output gain respectively. So that's pretty neat. Okay, now we're moving on to the warm electric guitar, because in EQ it has orange low shell. It has an orange high shell filter, parametric filter, and a low shell and a low pass filter. Whereas the low shell filter can increase the low ends of the frequencies and reduce the cutoff level, the low pass filter, on the other hand, can bypass the low frequencies and reduce the high frequencies together. The parametric filter, however, can adjust the sound by modifying the gain, center frequency, and bandwidth. There's even a similarity to the gain level that has a minus 3.4 dB in it, implying that it will remove the frequencies of the channel EQ entirely. So in future, it'd be probably better if I could slightly increase the gain level up to 1.5 instead of putting it in minus 3.4 dB, because it will tamper with the gain and cause the listener to get ear damage. So that's something I need to look up on another time. But the warm electric guitar, I wanted to break away from the usual compressor and get onto the adaptive limiter. The adaptive limiter is basically the same with the compressor, except you have to modify the gain, output ceiling, and look ahead to reduce the sound of the warm electric guitar so that it will modify with the main volume of the music production. For instance, I have been turning up the gain volume to 5.8 dB, the output ceiling is at minus 0.5 dB, and the look ahead is 50 ms, Mas Sinestro for short. Now we get onto the pedal board, and it's the similar thing with the compressor, except it will adjust the sound of the dynamics. For example, you have your high drive treble boost, which will increase the treble of the EQ, and the blue echo, which will increase or decrease the time, repeats, and mix of the EQ for EQ tonality. And at last, I have the amps, which have the gain, bass, mids, treble on the EQ, the reverberation and the effects in there, as well as the master volume and presence of it. I have been increasing the EQs level because I don't want to have the warm electric guitar turned down for the majority of it, meaning that the master level is key to increasing the volume of the warm electric guitar by itself, including the presence of an EQ, reverberation, and effects in this one. Finally, we come on to the main track stack of the guitars, which have the low shell filter, the parametric filters, and a low shell and a low pass filter. The low shell filter can only increase the low ends of the frequencies and decrease the cutoff levels, whereas the parametric filters can change the sound according to gain, center frequency, and bandwidth. The low pass filter can increase the low frequencies and minimize its high frequencies. So there's that. And also the gain has been put up to plus 3.5 dB, adding the frequencies together. Unlike with the other guitars in the track stack that have an individual thing where the gain level is at minus as a minus level in the decay, and it has and they both have a similarity to them. Finally, we get into the guitars of the compressor. As you can see, I've been reducing the sound of the dynamics, meaning that the threshold, ratio, makeup, and attack and release things have been modified under Studio VCA. So, what I should have done is add a distortion built in to the guitars, because it will work better if they sound different, if they were broken and distorted together, rather than just keeping it simple and basic with the channel EQ and compressor. But again, it's something I have to do for another time in a different way in this unit. Now we go on to Abbey Wood Strings Assemble. Now, in the EQ itself, I have been modifying the high pass filter, the low shelf filters, all the parametric filters, the low shelf filter. Whereas the high shelf filter and the low shelf filter can increase either low ends or high ends of the frequencies and reduce the cutoff levels. The high pass filter will only allow it to boost the high frequencies of the EQ in terms of sound. The parametric filters, on the other hand, can adjust the sound in terms of gain, center frequency, and bandwidth. The gain has been turned up to 8.5 dB. Gain level has been turned to 8.5 dB, partially because I want to add in frequencies of the high pass filters, high shelf filters, parametric filters, and low shelf filters together. So that's a big step up for the Abbey Wood Strings Assemble in there. Another thing I did was do what's handled the compressor of the sound, because I want to decrease the dynamic levels of the sound accordingly. For instance, I got the Abbey Wood String Assemble in the classic VCA section, which only has a threshold, ratio, and makeup, probably. I have been turning the limiter on, but again, I didn't have to do anything with it. So in future, I would expect to turn the limiter up a bit, but then again, it will have a different sound to the Abbey Wood strings they have in there. So I like to keep it simple and basic as possible without going overboard. Separating from the rest of the instruments, the Abbey Wood Strings has a vintage tube EQ where it allows me to control the low frequencies, mid frequencies, and high frequencies together. So, for instance, I have been changing the output levels by modifying the drive to 6.4 respectively. The output model is at Silky, which is what I like about the new sound of the Abbey Wood strings. The phase is natural because I want to deliver a soft side to the Abbey Wood Strings Assemble, and the volume is turned down to minus 5.8 dB. It would have been better if I can do something about the vintage tube EQ, because apparently I've been doing a little bit of it, but apparently the vintage tube EQ is part of the Abbey Wood strings, so it would be nice if I could modify the controls a little bit. So it doesn't matter. I will save that for another time in a different way. Then we get on to the electric piano. Now, unlike all the other instruments that have a classical instruments in there with a blend of electronic, and unlike the majority of the classical instruments, this one is in an electric piano, because this one is electronic and it has that kind of melody incorporated into the bridge, and it goes all the way to the chorus bit, much like with the Abbey Wood strings beforehand. So as you can see, we have the channel EQ that goes up to parametric filter and low shelf filter. Once again, that parametric filter can be changed in terms of gain, center frequency, and bandwidth, whereas the low shelf filter EQ can only bypass the low frequencies and decrease the cutoff levels of that high frequencies. So there's that, and the gain level is at plus 4.0 dB, meaning that the parametric filters and the low shelf filters will be added in together, changing the course of the classic suitcase Mark IV altogether. And lastly, we have the compressor itself. Once again, decreasing dynamics of the sound so that it will give it a boost for the main volume of the music production. As you can see, it goes on to vintage FET, modifying the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack and release. So there's that. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to put in the input and output gain for this one. So in future, I'm only going to have to focus on the input and output gain in this one, because I don't want to have to use the auto gain for this one, because it will overpower the rest of the instrument, because it will overpower it from the rest of the instruments together. So that's basically it. Penultimately, we have the drum kit, which only consists of channel EQ and compressor together. According to the channel EQ, it has a high pass filter, the parametric filter, and the low shelf filter. The high pass filter can only increase the high frequencies and reduce the low frequencies, whereas only the parametric filter can adjust the sound according to the gain, center frequency, and bandwidth, and as well as the low shelf filter that can only increase the low ends of the frequencies and reduce the cutoff levels. The gain levels, on the other hand, have a minus 3.0 dB because I wanted to remove the frequencies of the drums altogether to make way for the next plugin, which is the compressor. Speaking of the compressor, I have been reducing the dynamics of the drum kit because I have been adjusting the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack, and release levels while having to turn the limiter on. So the limiter hasn't been changed, but the input and output gain has, going at 6.5 dB and 3.0 dB, again slightly increasing in the output gain, while the input gain is moved up a bit. So there's that. And what I should be doing right here is that I need to add in some reverberation to that other heavy kit, because I don't want to have it go all out by having not lots of reverberation in there, because it can die down. It can overpower the rest of the instruments and die down a bit, so and drown out the instruments quite a bit. So I like to do some adjustments to that of the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack, and release levels, so that I won't go over the top with the drums and such. So a reverberation works best for the future when I make a thing with the drum kit. Finally, we come on to the vocals bit. Now, the thing with the vocals is that I have been using the natural vocal settings for this one, and according to the EQ, it has a high pass filter, a low shelf filter, and a parametric filter. The high pass filter can only increase the high frequencies and reduce the low frequencies, whereas with the high shelf filter, it will boost the high ends of the frequencies and decrease the cutoff levels of that, whilst the parametric filter can adjust the gain, center frequency, and bandwidth to change up the sound a bit. Now, the thing about the DSO2 is that I can adjust the threshold, the maximum reduction, and the frequency, meaning that I won't have to generate a filter hiss in the background, because if I try to record the vocals without having the DSO2 in there, it will start to take damage to the listener's earworms, and it won't be pretty good at all. So I've been doing the threshold, maximum reduction, frequency not at minus 9.8 dB, max reduction 5.6 dB, and 3,803 hertz in the frequency levels respectively. So there's that. And again, we have the compressor, which will reduce the dynamics of the sound of my vocals, according to which I have the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack, and release modified slightly, whereas the input gain is increasing the volume levels on it. The output gain, on the other hand, is decreased to minus 2.5 dB. Unlike all the other instruments that have compressors in them, I want to slightly decrease the output levels in it, because I'm not going to go all out with the input and output gain having to increase it slightly, because that won't make the vocals any better for me. Finally, we come on to the end verb plugin, which will control the reverberation effect of my lead vocals. As you can see, it has been altered to the attack, decay, sustain, and release, pre-delay, and hold for this one. The controls are slightly modified for that matter, including the dry and wet signals, the crossover, high cut, spread, and density set at 100% respectively. Another thing I should be doing is to modify the density and spread a little bit, because I want to decrease both of them to 55% and 85 and 80% on the spread respectively, individually, so that I don't have to mess about with a lot of reverb in this one. So that's pretty much it. The same goes with the second vocals, so I'm not going to go into them because it has some similarities in there that need to be adjusted. And at last, we come on to the final track stack, which contains mainly my backing vocals. As you can see, the channel EQ is set at... The channel EQ has a red high-pass filter, as well as the low shelf filter that has a decreased display level in here, whereas this one only has 1.70 in it. The high pass filter is only used for increasing the high frequencies and reducing the low frequencies, whereas the low shelf frequencies can maximize the low ends of the frequencies and decrease the cutoff levels from it, which is nice. And looking at the compressor right here, I've been modifying the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack, and release again to reduce the dynamics of the backing vocals that I have here. So there's not much else to say about the compressor, although it does need a little work for the mixing side of things, according to the input and output of it all. The DSO2 looks slightly different from the lead vocals that I've been recording, except that it has been modified slightly. For instance, the threshold is at 9.2 minus 9.2 dB, the max reduction is at 5.5 dB, and the frequency is set at 4020 hertz. So then again, I'm trying to not create a filter hiss and the audio feedback, because once again it might damage the earworms of the listener, whoever hears that song. I didn't do nothing to the limiter. However, I have been modifying the space designer built-in of the reverberation, meaning that I have been modifying the init level. The decay is set at 2.95 seconds, and I've been controlling the length and low spread and high spread of it all, with the dry and wet signals going up at minus 3.0 dB and a minus 8.80 dB into it. What I should what I should have done here is modify the low spread and high spread of it respectively, going in at 60% and low and 50 and 35% respectively, because the low spread and high spread similarities are just a bit too much for me. So there's that. And of course we have the output EQ, which contains a bit of parametric filters and low shelf filters respectively. So the same can be said and done for the fourth backing vocals in there. So I'm just not going into it, otherwise it will take some time getting used to in this video. Last but not least, we come to the final track stack of it all, which is the backing vocals of this track. The backing vocals here have together have a channel EQ and compressor, meaning that it has a low shelf filter, some parametric filters, and a low pass filter in there. The high pass filter can only bypass the high ends of frequencies and increase the cut-off levels, whereas the parametric filter can adjust the sound in terms of gain, center frequency, and bandwidth. The high pass level, on the other hand, can only increase the high frequency. The low pass filters, on the other hand, can increase the low frequencies and shrink the high frequencies. So that's pretty unique. And we come on to the gain level, which is at plus 4.4 dB, meaning that all the frequencies have been added on there to give it an extra boost. So we will now come on to the final thing of the compressor a bit. Sorry if my finger gets in the way of the camera. Then at last we come on to the compressor side of things. Again, I have been reducing the sound of the dynamics, meaning that I have been modifying the threshold, ratio, makeup, knee, attack and release levels of it all. And the thing about it is that it's at platinum digital, and it could have been better if I have been adding in some more plugins to make the vocals here stand out. So on the other hand, on the whole, the vocals here seem simple and basic, though it could have been added with some other plugins that will match up with my lead vocals in its entirety of the vocal production. And there you have it. The music production of Riches to Rags is finally finished. I just need some more contributions from other students who want to lend in their parts to each section of the song accordingly. Like, say for instance, I have a bassist, a guitarist, or vocalist. But then again, it's still a fun song to make, and I would love to do this again differently in this unit whenever I do this unit again. So thank you all very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to DJ DD for more music content, and be sure to check out our next episode of Feminfinity on anchor.fm/Feminfinity.